All right, and now I'd like to introduce Mark Orr and Dave Higdon, who will be talking about quantification and uncertainty quantification from their respective disciplines of psychology and statistics.
All right, Katie, thank you. I guess it's me first because my one sentence was just a sentence, but as you saw, Mark, his sentence might go on a long time, so we thought, all right, I'll talk first and talk about a few things. Then we'll move on. I'm Dave Higdon, statistician, way in over my head on all these socio-biological sorts of systems that we're looking at. So my world, I just came from Los Alamos, like lots of people in the session before. And my experience is pretty much with physical systems and combining models from these big computational models from these big physical systems, putting them together with data in sorts of ways to come up with ways to make predictions and inferences with these sorts of things. And so this was just a collection of experience I've had with different types of models, different data sets that I've worked with over the time. And if I look at all of them, they don't sound a lot alike what we heard so far today. So I'll talk a little bit about my hope for where these interactions might be. And Mark will also, I'm working with Mark some to try to figure out where are these connections that we can make that maybe don't do so much of this, a little more connecting and figuring out where can my experience and expertise and ideas come into interplay with dealing with big sociological and biological systems. So lots of experience in physical sorts of systems. All right, I'm going to wander anyway, but if you look at material science over there, I'll see if I can point. Yes, I can. So what happens here? The more detailed modeling you sort of get for something like this, the more you fill that thing up with atoms that have rules about how they're going to behave with one another. And so at first you thought this material might be something lattice-like, iron, something like that. But now you've filled it with all these actors that are iron atoms playing with each other, and they interact with each other. And so now all these atoms don't really have this it's not really iron anymore. It's a bunch of things interplaying, and you don't think that all these atoms are really like the one piece of iron you're going to crush or do something or shock or something like that. But you're hoping that when we put all this stuff together, the macro properties of this material are going to match what really happens in the laboratory. And so much like the social or biological systems that we're talking about, these sort of things are hopefully going to happen when we talk about combining rules that are social or biological in nature, and we want the macro ideas or concepts to work out when we're making predictions. So, okay, a lot of different ideas for what I'm talking about. I thought I might just talk about one from my experience. So here we have the universe evolving from up at the top there. Big Bang happens. Over time, you get a little bit of variation in the density of the universe, but because gravity's acting, sorts of things like that. Over time, enough things come together that stars form and start emitting energy. And then about 14, 15 billion years later, you see what we see now. So turns out I work with cosmologists that simulate this system. So here we are, a bunch of particles, dark matter starting out, maybe with variations that are very consistent with what we see in the cosmic microwave background. It evolves over time, and then we evolve this thing until we have a universe that we think ought to look something like the one that we have now. So I know we were worrying about sample sizes earlier today. And so this thing, yeah, there's just a sample size of 1, so it's not as much as you might like. Not all statisticians are going to be happy with that, but I'm good. I'll work with it. And I think the philosophy is, well, how are we going to overcome that? We're going to use lots of principles and modeling that we do know about. We know a lot about the universe. We know that over time, it's going to evolve according to rules that have to do with energy and gravity. So things will coalesce, and you'll see a universe that looks a lot like what we got today. But we don't know everything about how to put in the rules for this simulation. For instance, the makeup of the universe is something that we don't really know exactly. So we can put in things like dark matter, a certain amount of dark matter, a certain amount of baryonic matter. That's the stuff that we're made out of. Mysterious dark energy, let's put a lot of that in there. And the question is, well, how do we sort of make up our universe and maybe add a few extra things like the Hubble constant or the rate of expansion of the universe And what setting do we need for all these things to make a universe that when we compare it 14 billion years later to the one we see now, it looks like it? And so this is one of the inferences that we try to make. What's the makeup, or what are the parameters of this model that give us a universe that looks like what we're seeing now? All right, so that's one of the statistical questions, is parameter estimation. And it's hard because we have a sample size of 1. It's also hard because these computational models take, maybe a month to run, or maybe even more than that. It's also hard because they're not getting everything right in the physics. You try to get the rules you think you know right, the ones that are going to be important to what we're going to look at, but you don't have all the rules encoded in there. And so because of that, you want to be able to quantify your uncertainties. You want to estimate what these parameters might be, but not just sort of the best setting. You want to say, what are plausible settings? What might we see? And so then when we make predictions about the universe, another few billion years down the road, we'll have a big spread of uncertainty because we don't have everything quantified exactly right. We have things known up to, give or take a few standard deviations here. And so this will give us our predictive uncertainty. So this basic principle, we are very hopeful, is also going to work with different types of models. And so even though these physical models have really hard rules encoded to them, they hate it if I try to suggest, oh, you know what, if we put in a different value for the acceleration due to gravity, your model would do a lot better. For some reason, they don't like that. But there's all these physical rules here. Some of them have parameters that you're allowed to adjust. Some of them don't. But they're really special there, and I don't really like it that much. They're special rules. I mean, often they're called laws, right? You're not even allowed to break these things. You got to follow these rules exactly. I think in other sorts of domains, we don't know these rules as well. In fact, we don't know if we have them all. And there's a lot more flexibility in what are the parameterizations or how we describe those. And I think this extra flexibility might actually be good for combining data with these large system models to make inferences, because one of the things that's hard with these sorts of models is they're fairly rigid, meaning that if we put in what the data allow, we try to constrain to the data, they don't necessarily do exactly what nature says we ought to do. So that makes it hard. So there's an example of just one system we might model. There's another system, but I'm certainly not going to talk about that. But I'll tell you one thing. It's about putting atomic nuclei together, so protons and neutrons together, and that's hard. I was really proud of myself. We worked on this thing, and now we have predictions about what might be stable configurations of nuclei down the road. And then I learned today that trillions of cells we have in our body, and so how many nucleuses do we have in our body? Probably a lot more than that. Oh yeah, that's a much bigger system. That could be a lot harder. So like I said, in the statistical estimation, that we'll combine models with data, we'll estimate parameters, we'll make predictions with these models, knowing that they're not perfect, and come up and estimate uncertainties for these sorts of predictions. So that's my world, and Mark's going to come up and talk about his world, and then we're going to try to figure out where we might do our future work after that. Mark, come on up.